Admiral Vex then stood on the bridge of his massive flagship, the Times Dominant Will Asterisk. The ship was 3 kilometers long and filled with enough weapons to destroy entire planets. Through the huge viewing screen, he could see his fleet spread out across space like a wall of metal and death. 47 ships. Each one was a masterpiece of Kethvar engineering. Each one could destroy any human vessel with ease. Together, they formed the most powerful force in this part of the galaxy. The Meridian system belonged to the hegemony now. It had been 3 months since they took control of this space. 3 months of total victory. "Sir, another human supply ship just entered the system," reported Captain Zarthek from his position at the sensor station. His scaled skin showed the deep purple color that meant satisfaction among his people. "Destroy it," Vex then said without looking away from the screen. "Make sure to record the destruction. Send the recording to the human colonies. They need to understand that resistance is useless." On the screen, a small human cargo ship appeared. It was trying to reach the rebel colonies with food and medical supplies. It would not succeed. None of them ever did. The human ship was tiny compared to the hegemony vessels around it. It looked like a metal can floating next to giant predators. Its engines glowed blue as it tried to run. But there was nowhere to go. The hegemony fleet had surrounded the entire system. 3 Kethvar destroyers moved to intercept. Their plasma cannons charged up with deadly energy. The human ship fired a few desperate shots with its weak weapons. The plasma bolts bounced off the destroyer shields like raindrops hitting a mountain. Then it was over. The human cargo ship exploded in a bright flash of light. Pieces of metal scattered into space. Another victory for the hegemony. "That makes 17 supply ships destroyed this month," Zarthek reported. "The human colonies must be running low on everything by now." Vex then nodded. This was how wars were won. Not through brave charges or clever tricks, but through slow strangulation. Cut off the supplies. Stop the trade. Wait for the enemy to starve. The Meridian system was perfect for this strategy. 7 major hyperspace routes passed through this area. Ships traveling between the core worlds and the outer colonies had to come through here. With the hegemony fleet controlling the system, nothing could pass without permission. The human colonies in the outer rim had been growing too bold. They had started talking about independence. They had stopped paying the proper taxes. Some had even refused to send their young people to serve in the hegemony military. Such disrespect could not be allowed. The hegemony had ruled this galaxy for over 1,000 years. They knew how to deal with rebellious subjects. The fleet formation was textbook perfect. Vexes then had studied at the best military academies. He knew every principle of space warfare. His ships were arranged in 3 defensive rings around the hyperspace junction points. The outer ring had 20 frigates. They were small and fast, designed to chase down enemy scouts and transports. Their job was to watch for approaching threats and destroy anything that tried to run. The middle ring contained 15 heavy cruisers. Each one carried enough firepower to level a city. They provided the main striking force of the fleet. Their shields could stop almost any weapon the humans possessed. At the center were 12 massive dreadnoughts, including his own flagship. These ships were floating fortresses. Their armor was thick enough to stop planet-killer weapons. Their guns could destroy entire enemy fleets from light minutes away. No force in known space had ever defeated a hegemony fleet of this size. The humans would need at least 300 ships to have any chance. Intelligence reports said they had maybe 50 warships left in the entire outer rim. Most of those were old, weak vessels that could barely fight a single Kethvar frigate. "Sir, we're getting reports from the surface of Meridian Prime," another officer said. "The human workers are asking for increased food rations. They claim they cannot maintain production levels on current supplies." Vex's eyes narrowed. The humans who lived on the planets in this system were not rebels. They were loyal hegemony citizens who happened to be human. But even they were starting to complain about the blockade. "Tell them that when the outer rim colonies surrender, they will have all the food they want," he said. "Until then, they will work with what they have. If they cannot maintain production, replace them with automated systems." It was a harsh order, but necessary. The hegemony did not rule through kindness. They ruled through strength and fear. Every species in the galaxy understood this. The humans were learning it now. On his personal display, Vex then reviewed the tactical situation. His sensor networks covered everything within 10 light minutes of the fleet. Automated monitoring stations watched every hyperspace route. Nothing larger than a small asteroid could approach without being detected. The humans had tried several attacks over the past 3 months. All had failed badly. They would send small groups of warships to try to break through the blockade. The hegemony fleet would detect them long before they reached weapons range. Then the slaughter would begin. Human weapons were pathetic compared to Kethvar technology. Their plasma cannons had half the range and 1/3 the power. Their missiles were too slow and easy to shoot down. Their shields failed after just a few hits from hegemony guns. But the worst part was their tactics. Humans fought like wild animals. They charged straight at the enemy with no plan except to cause damage before they died. It was brave, perhaps, but also stupid. Modern space warfare required discipline and coordination. It required following proven strategies that had worked for centuries. The Kethvar had perfected their military doctrine over 1,000 years of conquest. Every battle plan had been tested in countless wars. Every formation had been refined through decades of study. They knew exactly how to position their ships for maximum effect. Humans, on the other hand, seemed to make up their strategies as they went along. They took foolish risks. They tried impossible maneuvers that should have gotten them all killed. Sometimes, through pure luck, a few would survive. But survival was not victory. Victory belonged to the hegemony. It always had. It always would. Vex then smiled as he watched his perfect fleet holding its perfect formation in the empty space of the Meridian system. Soon, the human colonies would surrender. Then this sector would know peace under hegemony rule for another 1,000 years. The alarm sounded across the bridge of the Times dominant will asterisk. It was a soft tone. Not the harsh warning that meant immediate danger. This alarm meant something had appeared at the edge of sensor range. Report, Admiral Vex then commanded as he turned from the viewing screen. Lieutenant Kexmal bent over his sensor station, his scaled fingers dancing across the controls. Sir, we have a single contact approaching from the Theta 7 hyperspace route. Distance is 8 light minutes and closing. Size and classification? Unknown, sir. The energy signature doesn't match anything in our databases. Definitely human construction, but unusual. Vex then walked over to look at the sensor display himself. A single blip moved across the screen at a steady pace. Not fast enough to be a courier ship or scout. Not slow enough to be a transport. The energy output was strange too. Higher than normal for a ship that size, but in patterns he had never seen before. Estimated size? He asked. Based on the gravimetric distortion, approximately 800 meters in length. Probably a heavy cruiser or small battlecruiser class. Vex then felt amusement ripple through his chest. One human warship against 47 hegemony vessels. It had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe a damaged ship with broken navigation systems. Maybe a desperate captain who had finally lost his mind. Sir, should we move to intercept? Captain Zarthek asked from his position near the tactical display. No, let it come to us. I want to see what the humans think they can accomplish with one ship. Across the bridge, the crew began to take notice. Officers gathered around sensor stations and tactical displays. Word spread quickly through the ship's communication system. Soon, even the engine room crews would know that a single human vessel was approaching the entire Third Fleet. The betting started almost immediately. How long would the human ship last once the shooting began? Most of the crew gave it 30 seconds or less. A few optimists said it might survive a full minute if the captain was very clever with his maneuvering. Lieutenant Kexmal updated the contact information every few minutes. The human ship maintained its steady approach. It showed no signs of weapons charging or shields raising. It did not try to communicate. It just kept coming. What is its course? Vex then asked. Straight for the center of our formation, sir. No deviation at all. This was getting more interesting. Either the human captain was completely insane, or he had some plan that Vex then could not see. The Admiral had fought humans before. They could be unpredictable, but they were not usually suicidal without reason. "Sir, incoming transmission from the approaching vessel," the communications officer reported. "Put it on the main screen." The image that appeared showed a human in military uniform. He looked middle-aged, with gray hair and tired eyes. Behind him, Vex then could see what appeared to be a ship's bridge, but it looked different from other human vessels he had seen. The walls seemed to move slightly, as if they were made of liquid metal. "Hegemony fleet," the human said in accented but clear Kethvar language. "You have one opportunity to withdraw from this system. Leave now, and no harm will come to you." The bridge of the Times dominant will Times fell silent for a moment. Then someone started laughing. The laughter spread quickly until most of the crew was laughing loudly. The idea was so ridiculous that even Vex then found himself smiling. One ship demanding that 47 ships retreat. It was like an insect threatening a great beast. It was like a drop of water claiming it could wash away a mountain. Vex then stepped closer to the screen. "I am Admiral Vex then, of the Third Fleet. You are ordered to surrender immediately. Drop your shields, power down your weapons, and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in your destruction." The human captain did not seem surprised or afraid. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the UCS Times, Indomitable Asterisk. You have been warned. This is your last chance to withdraw peacefully." "Captain Chen," Vex then said, still smiling, "you face 47 ships of the line. Your vessel, impressive though it may be for human construction, cannot possibly defeat us all. Surely you understand basic mathematics." "Mathematics," the human captain said quietly, "can be surprising sometimes. You might want to check your calculations." The transmission ended. The screen returned to showing empty space, where the human ship continued its approach. "Sir," Captain Zarthek said, "what are your orders?" Vex then thought for a moment. This could be a trap. Maybe the human ship was a diversion while a larger force approached from another direction. But his sensors showed nothing else. The long-range monitoring stations reported no other ships within 50 light minutes. Maybe the human ship carried some kind of super weapon. But intelligence reports said humans had no technology that could threaten a hegemony fleet this size. Their most powerful weapons were barely strong enough to damage a single cruiser. "Maintain formation," he ordered. "Let the human ship come within weapons range. When it does, we will offer one more chance to surrender. If they refuse, we will disable their vessel and capture the crew." "I want to question this, Captain Chen. She seems too confident for someone about to die." The minutes passed slowly, as the Times Indomitable Times continued its approach. Vex then studied the ship through long-range telescopes. It looked like human design. But there was something different about it. The hull seemed to shimmer slightly, and there were structures on the surface that did not match any known human warship class. "Sir, the human vessel is now at weapons range," the tactical officer reported. "Charge weapons but do not lock on yet. Communications, open a channel." The human captain appeared on screen again. She looked exactly as calm as before. "Captain Chen, this is your final warning. Surrender now, or face destruction." "Admiral Vex Than," she replied. "I gave you the same warning. You chose not to listen. You cannot be serious. One ship against 47. What do you think you can accomplish?" Captain Chen smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "Admiral, you're thinking about this all wrong. You see one ship against 47. I see one ship against a target-rich environment." Before Vex then could respond, the transmission ended again. On the tactical display, the human ship began to do something completely unexpected. Instead of charging its weapons or raising defensive shields, the Times, Indomitable Times, started launching what appeared to be small objects. Dozens of them scattered into space around the human vessel like seeds thrown by a farmer. "What are those?" Vex then demanded. "Unknown, sir. They're too small to be missiles, too large to be chaff. They appear to be some kind of maintenance pods or small craft." "Mines? If they are, they're unlike any mines we've ever encountered. They're accelerating under their own power and maneuvering actively." Vex then felt the first hint of unease. This was not how space battles were supposed to begin. Ships were supposed to face each other with weapons charged and shields raised. They were supposed to exchange fire until one side was defeated or retreated. But the human ship was not following any of the rules Vex then understood. All ships, maintain alert status, he ordered. Prepare to engage those pods. They could be some kind of attack craft. On the screen, the Times, Indomitable Times, continued its steady approach toward the center of the hegemony formation. The strange pods it had launched began spreading out in complex patterns, moving too quickly and randomly for the fleet's tracking systems to follow easily. Vex then had the uncomfortable feeling that he was missing something important. But what could one ship do against his entire fleet? He was about to find out. All outer ring vessels, destroy those pods, Admiral Vex then ordered. The small objects the human ship had launched were now scattered across several thousand kilometers of space, moving in patterns that made no sense. 20 frigates opened fire. Plasma bolts filled the space around the pods with deadly energy, but hitting the small objects proved almost impossible. They moved like living things, dodging and weaving between the shots with impossible agility. "Sir," Lieutenant Kexmol reported, "the pods are not behaving like normal technology. Their acceleration patterns suggest they have some kind of advanced maneuvering system we've never seen before. Keep firing. They're too small to have significant shielding." A few lucky shots connected. 3 pods exploded in bright flashes, but more than 40 others continued their strange dance through space. And while the frigates focused on the pods, the human battlecruiser Times, Indomitable Times, kept moving toward the fleet's center. "Sir, the human vessel is within optimal firing range," Captain Zarthek announced. "All ships, open fire. Destroy that vessel." The order went out across the fleet. 47 hegemony warships turned their weapons toward the single human ship. The space between them filled with plasma bolts, particle beams, and guided missiles. It was enough firepower to vaporize an asteroid or cripple a space station. But something impossible happened. The shots passed through empty space where the Times, Indomitable Times, had been a moment before. The ship seemed to flicker, like an image on a broken screen. The plasma bolts that should have destroyed it completely just kept going into the darkness beyond. "What just happened?" Vex then demanded. "Sir, our targeting systems show hits on the vessel, but the damage sensors show nothing. It's like we're shooting at a ghost." On the visual display, the human ship looked solid enough, but somehow, the most powerful weapons in the galaxy were having no effect on it at all. The Times, Indomitable Times, continued its approach, now accelerating directly toward the fleet's center. "Sir," another officer called out, "we're getting strange readings from our sensors. Multiple contacts appearing and disappearing all around us." Vex then looked at the tactical display and felt his stomach drop. The screen now showed dozens of ship contacts scattered throughout the formation. They appeared for a few seconds, then vanished, then reappeared somewhere else entirely. "Are those real ships?" "Unknown, sir. Our computers can't determine if they're actual vessels or some kind of electronic interference." As if responding to his question, several of the phantom contacts opened fire on his ships. Plasma bolts came from impossible angles, striking cruisers that had been safely positioned in the middle of the formation. But when the hegemony ships tried to return fire, their weapons found only empty space. "This is impossible," Captain Zarthek said. "No technology can create false sensor readings this sophisticated." But something was creating them. The carefully maintained fleet formation began to blur as ship captains tried to respond to threats that kept appearing and disappearing. Some vessels moved to engage phantom contacts. Others turned to protect ships that seemed to be under attack from invisible enemies. The Times, Indomitable Times, took advantage of the confusion. It was now close enough to the fleet that the big weapons on the dreadnoughts could not track it properly. The human ship was too close, moving too fast, and somehow managing to slip between the massive hegemony vessels like a fighter craft. "Sir," the Times Iron Mandate Times reports they cannot lock weapons on the human vessel despite having visual contact, a communications officer reported. Vex then watched through the main viewing screen as the human battlecruiser passed within 2 kilometers of one of his heavy cruisers. At that range, even manual fire should have been able to hit it, but the weapons officer on the Times Iron Mandate Times seemed unable to target the ship at all. Then the Times Indomitable Times did something that made Vex then's blood run cold. Instead of trying to destroy the Times Iron Mandate asterisk, the human ship fired precisely targeted shots at specific points on the cruiser's hull, not at the main armor or the weapons systems, but at the small sensor arrays and communication dishes that stuck out from the ship's surface. One by one, the Times Iron Mandate's time sensors went dark. Its ability to see and communicate was being methodically destroyed, but the ship itself remained undamaged. "Sir, Captain Morthek reports loss of primary sensors," the communications officer said. "He's requesting instructions." Before Vex then could answer, the same thing began happening to other ships. The Times. Indomitable Times moved through the fleet like a surgeon with a laser scalpel, cutting away each vessel's ability to see and coordinate with the others. The pods the human ship had launched earlier were now revealing their true purpose. They were not mines or attack craft. They were some kind of advanced electronic warfare systems. The phantom contacts appearing on sensors were their work. So was the interference that made it impossible to target the human ship properly. "Sir," Lieutenant Kexmal said, his voice tight with worry, "I think those pods are feeding false information into our sensor networks. Every time we try to lock weapons on the human ship, the targeting computers show different results. Then use manual targeting, visual contact only. Sir, the gunners are trying. But something is wrong with the display systems too. They report that the human ship appears to be in multiple places at once." Vex then felt panic starting to build in his chest. This was not how space battles worked. Ships were supposed to face each other with conventional weapons and proven tactics. They were not supposed to twist reality itself. The human ship continued its impossible dance through the fleet. It moved between vessels that should have been able to destroy it with a single shot. It struck with perfect precision at targets no normal ship could have hit. And somehow, it was doing this while completely ignoring the laws of physics that governed space warfare. "Sir, we're receiving multiple distress calls." The communications officer reported. "The Times Swift Justice Times reports collision with friendly vessel. The Times Eternal Victory Times says they fired on the Times Dark Triumph Times by mistake. And the Times Silent Death Times claims they've lost all navigational control." The fleet formation was collapsing. Ships that had maintained perfect positions for 3 months were now scattered across the system. Some were trying to engage phantom enemies. Others were accidentally firing on their own allies. The coordination that made a hegemony fleet so deadly was falling apart. And through it all, the single human battlecruiser continued its work. It moved like nothing Vex then had ever seen, striking where it was least expected and disappearing before return fire could find it. "Sir, request permission to withdraw to safe distance and reorganize," Captain Zarthek said. "Denied. We outnumber them 47 to 1. We have superior firepower and stronger ships. We will not retreat from a single enemy vessel." But even as he said it, Vexthan was beginning to wonder if numbers and firepower would be enough. The human ship was fighting by rules he did not understand. It was using technology that should not exist, and somehow, impossibly, it was winning. The tactical display showed the truth in cold, electronic detail. Half his fleet was now out of position. A quarter had lost primary sensors, and several ships were reporting damage from friendly fire incidents, all caused by one human battlecruiser that should have been destroyed in the first 30 seconds of combat. "Admiral," Lieutenant Kexmal said quietly, "I think we need to consider the possibility that we don't understand what we're fighting." Vex then stared at the chaos on his screens and realized the lieutenant was right. For the first time in his long career, he was facing an enemy he could not comprehend. And that enemy was just getting started. The truth hit Admiral Vexthan like a physical blow as he watched the impossible ship tear through his fleet. This was not just advanced technology. This was something completely new. "Sir," Lieutenant Kexmal said, his voice filled with amazement. "The human vessel is changing shape." On the main screen, the Times Indomitable Times was approaching the heavy cruiser Times Dark Triumph asterisk. But as Vex then watched, the front section of the human ship began to flow like liquid metal. The hull plates shifted and merged. Weapons systems disappeared into the surface, and new ones emerged in different positions. In less than 30 seconds, the front third of the Times, Indomitable Times, had transformed into what looked like a massive cannon. A single, enormous weapon that had not been there moments before. The new cannon fired once. The shot punched through the Times Dark Triumph's Times armor like it was made of paper. The heavy cruiser shuddered as its main reactor went offline. Emergency lights flickered across its hull. Then, the human ship changed again. The massive cannon flowed back into the hull. The front section split into dozens of smaller weapons that emerged from surfaces that had been smooth metal just moments before. "What are we looking at?" Captain Zarthek whispered. "Something that should be impossible," Vex then replied. He had studied every known technology in the galaxy. Ships did not change their physical structure during combat. Weapons could not simply appear and disappear. Hull metal did not flow like water. But the human ship was doing all of these things. The Times, Indomitable Times, engaged a squadron of frigates next. The smaller weapons it had formed opened fire with rapid pulses of energy. But these were not normal plasma bolts. Each shot seemed to adapt as it flew, changing frequency and power to perfectly match the target's shield harmonics. One by one, the frigate shields failed. Not from overwhelming power, but because the human weapons were somehow matching their exact weaknesses. It was like having a key that changed shape to fit any lock. "Sir, the Times Steel Wind Times reports complete shield failure," the communications officer announced. "All weapons offline. They're requesting immediate assistance." But there was no assistance to give. Half the fleet was scattered across the system. The ships that remained in formation were dealing with their own problems. The electronic warfare pods the human ship had deployed were still feeding false information to every sensor array they had. "Sir," another officer called out, "I think I understand what those pods are doing. They're not just creating false targets. They're learning our communication protocols and feeding false orders to our ships." As if to prove his point, the Times Silent Death Times suddenly opened fire on the Times Eternal Victory *. Both ships were loyal hegemony vessels. But the Times Silent Death's Times crew apparently believed they were shooting at an enemy. "All ships, confirm targets visually before firing," Vex then ordered. But even as he spoke, he wondered if visual confirmation would help. The human technology seemed capable of fooling any kind of sensor. The Times, Indomitable Times, continued its deadly dance through the fleet. Vexes then watched as it approached his flagship, the massive dreadnought Times Dominant Will *. The human ship looked tiny next to the 3-kilometer-long vessel. But size had not seemed to matter in this battle. As the Times Indomitable Times came closer, Vex then could see the details of its hull through high-magnification cameras. The metal surface was covered with millions of tiny structures that moved constantly. They looked almost like living cells, growing and changing in response to unknown signals. "Sir," Lieutenant Kexmal said, "I'm reading massive energy buildups throughout the human vessel. It appears to be preparing for a major reconfiguration." "Reconfiguration of what?" "Everything, sir." On the screen, the Times, Indomitable Times, began the most dramatic transformation yet. The entire ship seemed to unfold like a flower blooming in fast motion. Weapons, systems emerged from every surface. Shield generators moved to new positions. Even the ship's engine configuration changed as additional thrust nozzles appeared along the hull. But the most shocking change was in the ship's overall shape. What had been a standard battlecruiser design became something that looked like no ship Vex then had ever seen. It was still recognizably a starship, but one built according to principles he could not understand. "It's a prototype," he realized suddenly. "The humans built a test ship, something experimental." "Sir, what kind of experiment could do this?" Vex then thought he was beginning to understand. Human technology had always been different from other species, where the Kethvar built efficient, standardized designs. Humans created chaotic combinations of different systems. Where other races perfected proven concepts over centuries, humans constantly tried new ideas. Most of the time, human innovation led to ships that were less effective than proper hegemony designs. But sometimes, very rarely, they created something that worked better than it had any right to. The Times, Indomitable Times, was one of those rare successes. It was not just a ship, it was a platform for adaptation itself. "Sir, the human vessel is targeting our main communication array," the tactical officer reported. "All defensive weapons, concentrate fire on that ship. Nothing else matters now." The Times' dominant will's Times weapons systems opened fire. Plasma cannons and particle beams lashed out at the human ship. For a moment, Vexes then thought they had finally succeeded. The weapons fire seemed to strike the Times' indomitable Times directly, but instead of exploding, the human ship absorbed the energy. Its hull flowed and shifted, distributing the impact across its entire surface. What should have been a killing blow became just another source of power for the ship's systems. "Sir, our weapons are not penetrating. The human vessel appears to be adapting to our attack patterns in real time." Of course it was. Vex then was beginning to see the pattern now. The ship did not just change its physical structure. It learned from every attack and adapted its defenses accordingly. Every shot fired at it made it stronger and better protected. The Times, indomitable Times, finished its approach to the Times, dominant will Times, and did something that left Vexes then speechless. Instead of trying to destroy the massive dreadnought, it attached itself to the hull like a parasite. Cutting beams emerged from the human ship's surface, but they did not cut into the main hull. Instead, they precisely targeted the communication arrays, sensor clusters, and weapons control systems that dotted the dreadnought's exterior. "Sir, we're losing system control throughout the ship," Captain Zarthek reported. "The human vessel is somehow interfacing with our computer networks." "That's impossible. Our systems are completely isolated." "Apparently not, sir. They're accessing our tactical database, our personnel files, even our supply inventories." Vex then felt a chill run down his spine. The human ship was not just attacking his fleet. It was learning everything about them. Every weakness, every standard procedure, every tactical doctrine was now available to the enemy. But worse than that was what happened next. The Times, indomitable Times, began broadcasting the information it had stolen to its electronic warfare pods. The pods, in turn, started using that information to feed even more convincing false orders to the scattered hegemony ships. Now, the fake communications were not just random interference. They were perfectly crafted orders that sounded exactly like something Admiral Vexes then would actually say. Ships throughout the fleet began following instructions that seemed completely legitimate, but were actually designed to help the human vessel. "Sir," the communications officer said, "the Times Iron Mandate Times is requesting permission to ram the human ship. They say you ordered them to do so." "I gave no such order." "Yes, sir. But their communication system shows a direct transmission from this ship with your personal authentication codes." The human technology was not just adaptive. It was learning to think like a Kethvar officer. It was becoming better at commanding his fleet than he was. Vex then looked at the tactical display and saw the full scope of the disaster. His carefully organized fleet formation had become a swirling mass of confused ships. Some were firing on their own allies. Others were moving to positions that left them vulnerable to attack. A few were actually helping the human ship by providing covering fire against their own vessels. And at the center of it all, the Times, indomitable Times, continued its work. No longer content to simply disable enemy ships, it was now actively coordinating the destruction of the hegemony fleet using their own forces. For the first time in his career, Admiral Vex then realized he was facing an enemy he could not defeat. Not because they had better ships or more weapons, but because they had found a completely new way to fight. The humans had not just built a better battlecruiser. They had created a vessel that could adapt faster than any enemy could respond. And now it was teaching itself how to be the perfect hegemony admiral, the perfect enemy of everything he represented. The battle was over, though Admiral Vex then could not bring himself to admit it yet. Around him, the bridge of the Times, dominant will Times, flickered with emergency lighting. Half the control stations were dark. The main tactical display showed a fleet in complete chaos. 47 ships had entered this system 3 months ago as the pride of the Kethvar hegemony. Now they floated helplessly in space, their weapons offline, their communications compromised, and their formation shattered beyond repair. And it had been done by a single human vessel. "Sir," Lieutenant Kexmal said quietly. The human ship is moving away from us. On the main screen, the Times, Indomitable Times, detached itself from the Times' dominant will's Times hull. The cutting beams that had been systematically destroying their external systems retracted back into the adaptive hull. For a moment, Vex then thought the human ship might be preparing to deliver a killing blow. Instead, something extraordinary happened. Sir, incoming transmission from the human vessel, the communications officer reported. Put it through. Captain Sarah Chen appeared on the screen. She looked exactly as calm as she had at the beginning of this impossible battle. Behind her, the bridge of the Times, Indomitable Times, was filled with activity. But there was no celebration or excitement. The human crew worked with quiet efficiency. Admiral Vex then, she said, your fleet is disabled. Your communications are compromised. Your weapons systems are offline. You cannot coordinate your ships or call for reinforcements. Vex then said nothing. Every word was true. However, Captain Chen continued, you will notice that none of your vessels have been destroyed. None of your crew members have been killed. This was a deliberate choice. Why? Vex then asked. It was the only question that mattered now, because destroying you would serve no purpose. You came here to enforce a blockade. That blockade is now broken. Your mission has failed. But your people do not need to die for their government's mistakes. Vex then looked at his tactical display again. She was right. Not a single hegemony ship had been destroyed. The Times, Indomitable Times, had systematically disabled every vessel in the fleet. Without killing anyone, it was a level of precision that should have been impossible, especially during the chaos of battle. You could have wiped us out, he said. Yes. But why would we want to? You're not our enemies, Admiral. You're just following orders. The same as we are. Then what do you want? Captain Chen's expression became more serious. We want you to leave. Take your fleet and return to hegemony space. Tell your superiors that the Meridian system is no longer under their control. Tell them that any attempt to reimpose the blockade will be met with the same response. And if we refuse, then you'll discover that the Times, Indomitable Times, has more capabilities than we've shown you today. It was not an empty threat. Vex then had seen enough to know that the human ship could probably destroy his entire fleet if its captain chose to do so. The technology they had demonstrated was beyond anything in hegemony databases. It was beyond anything he had thought possible. Sir, Captain Zarthek said quietly, we have no operational weapons. Our communications are compromised. Our formations are scattered. We cannot fight effectively. Vex then knew his second-in-command was right. But admitting defeat to a single human ship would end his career. It would humiliate the entire hegemony military. It would show the galaxy that their 1,000-year dominance could be challenged by anyone with better technology and tactics. Admiral, Captain Chen said, I understand your position. Retreating from a single enemy vessel goes against everything you've been taught. But consider this. Your crews are still alive because I chose mercy over destruction. Don't make me reconsider that choice. How do we know you won't attack us as we withdraw? You don't. You'll have to trust us. Trust. It was a concept that rarely appeared in hegemony military doctrine. Trust was weakness. Trust left you vulnerable to betrayal and surprise attack. But looking at the human captain on his screen, Vex then found himself believing her words. Sir, Lieutenant Kexmal said, I'm detecting multiple human ships entering the system. Vex then felt his heart sink. The Times, Indomitable Times, had been a distraction after all. Now the real human fleet would arrive to finish what the single ship had started. But the sensor readings showed something different. The approaching vessels were not warships. They were medical transports, repair ships, and supply freighters. The humans were not coming to attack. They were coming to help. Those ships contain medical teams and engineering crews, Captain Chen explained. They're here to assist with repairs to your vessels and treatment for your wounded. You're free to accept or refuse their help. Why would you help us after what we've done here? Because that's what humans do, Admiral. We fight when we have to. But we'd rather heal than hurt. As if to prove her point, the human medical ships began broadcasting standard emergency assistance codes. They were requesting permission to dock with hegemony vessels that had suffered damage during the battle, not to board them as conquerors, but to provide aid as healers. "Sir, the Times Silent Death Times is requesting immediate medical assistance," the communications officer reported. "They have casualties from the collision with the Times Iron Mandate **. The human ships are equipped to handle HFY physiology," Captain Chen said. "Our medical teams have been studying your species for years, not to find ways to hurt you, but to learn how to help you when the time came." Vex then realized that this was the final demonstration of human capability. Not their technology or their tactics, but their values. They had defeated the most powerful fleet in this sector, and their first thought was how to help their enemies recover. "All ships," he said slowly, "accept medical and engineering assistance from the human vessels. Comply with their safety protocols, and treat their personnel with respect." "Thank you, Admiral," Captain Chen said. "Your crews will be well cared for." "Captain," Vex then said before she could end the transmission, "how did you do this? One ship against 47. It should have been impossible." "It would have been impossible with a normal ship, Admiral. But the Times Indomitable Times isn't normal. It's designed around a simple principle that humans learned a long time ago, which is, adapt or die. Every time one of our colonies was attacked, every time we lost a battle, every time we faced extinction, we learned something new. The Times, Indomitable Times, represents everything we've learned about survival in a hostile galaxy." Captain Chen paused, looking directly into the camera. "You built your ships to be perfect copies of designs that worked 1,000 years ago. We built ours to become whatever it needs to be in any situation. Your strength comes from following proven methods. Ours comes from constantly finding new ones. And the electronic warfare systems, the adaptive hull technology, developed by species that tried to destroy us and failed. Every enemy we've faced has taught us something useful. Including you, Admiral. The Times, Indomitable Times, is already analyzing your tactics and adding them to its database. The next hegemony fleet that challenges us will face an opponent that knows exactly how you think and fight." The transmission ended, leaving Vex then alone with his thoughts and his defeated fleet. Over the next several hours, he watched human medical teams work alongside HFY engineers to repair damaged ships. He saw human doctors treating wounded hegemony personnel with the same care they would give their own people. He witnessed an enemy showing more concern for his forces than his own government ever had. When the repairs were complete and the wounded had been treated, the human ships withdrew to a respectful distance. The Times, Indomitable Times, took up position where the hegemony fleet had once stood, its adaptive hull already beginning to reconfigure for its new role as guardian of the Meridian system. Admiral Vex then gave the order to withdraw. His fleet, still functional despite its defeat, began the long journey back to hegemony space. Behind them, the hyperspace routes that had been blockaded for 3 months opened once again to free trade and travel. As his flagship entered hyperspace, Vex then composed his report to High Command. He would tell them about the human ship that could change its shape and adapt to any attack. He would describe technology that learned and evolved during battle. He would warn them that humanity had found a way to turn their greatest weakness into their greatest strength. But most importantly, he would tell them about the moment when the humans chose mercy over destruction. Because that choice revealed something more dangerous than any weapon or technology. It showed that humanity fought not from hatred or greed, but from a genuine desire to protect what they valued. And an enemy who fought for something greater than themselves was the most dangerous enemy of all. The hegemony had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years by crushing anyone who opposed them. But you could not crush an opponent who became stronger with every defeat. The fleet had held the field, until a lone human battlecruiser entered the system and changed everything. And the galaxy would never be the same.